Okay. And so we're going to do a little bit of JavaScript programming. We're just going to go over a few basic concepts. And so to get there again, what I'm going to do from Blackboard, if I go to course information, I'm going to sit down. I'll click on this Open Lab site link to bring us to our homepage. And then under links, I'm going to go to schedule. And then we're in week 1, so I'm going to click on this week 1 right here. Or you can just scroll down. This is just a table of contents, so you can hide this and just scroll to here. And this is the first thing we're doing, JavaScript intro. We're going to be talking about JavaScript. So if you click on here, it should bring you out to these notes. We're going to talk about just a few basic things with JavaScript. And I'm going to demonstrate a couple things. And you guys can follow along in a second. And I'll talk about how to do that. And then, we'll just learn kind of a couple basics. So we're going to be learning JavaScript in this class. That's kind of the main language that we're going to be using. You may have touched on JavaScript in MMP 100 at some point, or you may not have. Either way, we're going to be starting from the beginning, so that's fine. JavaScript is a relatively new programming language. It was first created in 1995 by the people who create the Mozilla Firefox browser, who are responsible for creating a lot of the web technologies that make the internet, what it is now. It was very, very exciting in 1995, and it's just gotten more and more exciting as the web has become more of a, daily part of our life. And with HTML and CSS, which you definitely touched on a little bit in MMP 100, JavaScript is sort of the third main language that is used to make websites. HTML, as you probably remember, is used to make the content of a website. CSS is used to make the style of a website, the fonts and colors. And then JavaScript is what makes the website do stuff besides just show content. JavaScript is how we fill out forms, how we post on blogs, how we animate, how we make games, how we do anything that involves interaction beyond just loading the page from the beginning. And JavaScript kind of started out as this very simple language that just did a few kind of little bells and whistles on the website, like making a cool animation. But it's become literally the most popular programming language. If you go to Stack Overflow developer survey of any year, honestly, it won't matter. Let's go to 2023. We are going to see what is the most popular language. There it is, JavaScript. So when they survey professional developers as well as other people, JavaScript is 63% the most used language. So it's not like the best programming language ever invented. It has a lot of weird quirks and things, performance problems and stuff like that. But it's a very popular language because it's on the web. It's easier to learn than a lot of languages because they've simplified a lot of things. And it's just really easy. We can do it in the browser. We don't have to compile stuff. We don't need 6 other programs. We don't have to think about how much memory our computer is using when we just make a circle on our website. So it's very nice to use. I use it for all of my work. I really I've been programming with it for basically my entire life since I was 10 years old. And I really like it. It's fun to use. I use it for a lot of stuff. I'll give you a quick example. There's a faculty show that's going to open in a few weeks. And I'll tell you a secret. If you're a faculty and you submit something to the show, they don't even look at it. You just automatically get in. So it's a fun time for me as an artist to just make something that I would never make otherwise because I know they're just going to put it on the wall. And so I can make whatever I want. So what I'm making is, I'll show you. I actually made it in P5. Well, I'm painting it, but I designed it in P5. So I'll show you guys what I'm working on. What I'm gonna do, I'm not done with it yet, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna paint a bunch of QR codes onto a painting. And I've been using P5 to figure out how to paint the QR codes. So I made this little program. I wrote a poem about art. And then when I run this program, it generates this design of QR codes. And this works. If you use your phone, each one of those boxes is one word of the poem. And I'm going to paint this onto a painting, and I'm going to put it in the gallery. You can go, in a few weeks, hopefully, it's due in a few days, but hopefully you'll be able to go over to Fitterman, and I'll have painted this onto a painting, and you can read the poem. So I used P5 to do this, and it literally, I had this idea a few days ago. I was like, I don't even know how to make a QR code, but I just Googled it, and I found somebody else who had programmed it, and I took their code, and I put it into this thing, and then I modified it to do this, and now I have a poem written in QR codes. So that's why I like programming. I like to do stuff like that. It's also useful for practical making websites and apps and things like that as well. Let's keep going. So if you're really interested in learning more about JavaScript, there's a couple links here. One is what is JavaScript on MDN. Their Mozilla Developer Network, as I mentioned, are the people who originally created JavaScript, so they know the best. And then this guy, Douglas Crockford, this is part of a lecture series. It's incredibly long, so it's very, very nerdy. This is obviously an ad. Let me skip through this ad. This is actually chapter 2. So there's a whole first chapter that's just kind of about computer science stuff and the web and all this other stuff. But there's this whole long lecture series on what JavaScript is. But this guy is really funny. He's talking about Netscape. Do you guys know what Netscape is? A couple of people? It's one of the first browsers. Anyway, it's very funny. It's very, very long and nerdy. I suspect that most of you probably will not be that interested. But if you are, that's where I would start. And a couple things to talk about before we get into JavaScript. So, when you put JavaScript on your resume, make sure that you put JavaScript and not Java. This is a very common mistake. It's literally a marketing thing. They have nothing to do with each other. JavaScript used Java in the name because Java back in the 90s was the most popular programming language. Or it wasn't really the most popular, but it was kind of the new trendy programming language for various reasons. So Java is not JavaScript. That's what we're gonna go with there. Okay, so what is JavaScript? As I mentioned, it's a scripting language that's packaged with HTML and CSS, and it can interact with HTML and CSS to make changes to your website. The thing that it does, and I kind of already mentioned this, but the thing that it really does is it makes a website that would otherwise be static, meaning that when you load the website, nothing changes. So for example, these very notes are enabled by JavaScript. If I open up this page again, when the page first opens, this is what it looks like. And when I click on this button, it turns into this cool slides with these moving backgrounds. That's all JavaScript stuff that I wrote just to make the slides look nice. So that's the difference between static and dynamic. When you open a website and you see text and images and they don't do anything, that's static. And that's what a lot of websites are, and that's cool. But what JavaScript does is it allows us to make websites dynamic, meaning they can change over time. So we can make games and interactive stories and comics and things that move and change with user input. So that's why it's cool, and that's what we're going to use it to do. Okay, so we're going to write a little bit of code now, and we're going to do it right in the browser. You don't have to do it on the page that I have open. You can literally do it on any website that you've ever been on, but we're going to do it in the console, which is built into the browser. So that's another thing that's very cool about this technology, is that every single copy of a browser has it built in. We can just write it and see what it does without doing anything else. So how do we get there? If you're on a Mac, you just hit Command-Option-J. If you're on a Windows, you could hit Control-Shift-J. If you want to use the interface, you can go to View, go to Developer, and go to JavaScript Console, and it'll open like that. And there's another way to get there. You click on this menu over here in Chrome. You go down to More Tools, and you go to Developer Tools, and you'll see this here. You might be over here on the Elements page, which shows you the HTML and CSS, but where we want to be is the console. And if you don't see console in that menu, you might need to click on this little 2-arrow drop down and find it there. You can see there's a few things here that's basically telling me my internet is not working that well. I'm just going to click on this little X button or cross button to get rid of that. And then here we have our JavaScript console. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger on my screen so you guys can see it, but you don't need to do that. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. And the thing that's nice about this console, as I mentioned, I can type all sorts of crazy stuff in here, and it'll do it. It'll just do whatever I want it to do. And every browser has this. As I mentioned, it's harder to find in Safari, but you can add it. But I recommend using Chrome. You can also use Firefox and find this if you want to. Is everybody able to open that window and see that console? It works with Safari, but you have to go into Settings, and then you have to go to Advanced, and then you have to scroll down to the bottom and click on a little checkbox that says Developer Tools, and then you'll be able to get to it. So it's a little bit more setup.
I don't think that brought me to the right place.
Let me take a look. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. You can. So this is Firefox. You can. That's the same thing, but for Firefox. Does anybody else need help getting there? Good. Okay, so let's write a little bit of code, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about what we're doing. This isn't how we're going to do most of our work, but this is just a good place to start to go over some of the basics. One of the things we can do with code is just do math. There's a lot of math involved, but one of the nice things about code is you don't actually have to be good at math because it'll do the math for you. So for example, if I want to know what 2 plus 2 is, I can just write it, and I hit enter, and it tells me the answer. I can do 2 times 2 with the asterisk, which is the Shift 8 key. It'll give me that answer as well. I can do 2 minus 2. It'll tell me that. I can do 2 divided by 2 with the slash. So it can do basic math. It can do more complex math as well. But we have our basic arithmetic with the plus, minus, multiplication, and division. We will use that a bit, but not quite yet with our drawing. We'll use numbers, but not a lot of math at the beginning. The reason we have the console is mostly for debugging. So we can do things like look at our web page and see why something might not be working. Sometimes we'll see errors. Like if I do a bunch of random stuff, I'll get an error. And sometimes, a lot of the time the error will give me information about why my program isn't working the way I want it to. So that's another thing that we use it for. And we'll actually talk a lot more about debugging in a couple weeks. We'll go over some basic debugging techniques. When we write something like this is called an expression. Programming is a language, and so we use a lot of language or linguistic terms when we talk about how to write code. So an expression in English is just like something that you say. If I say a sentence, you can refer to that as an expression. I'm expressing a thought or an idea. In programming, when we say expression, we really just mean like a line of code, essentially. So if you hear me say that, if I say this expression does blah, 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 that's what I mean. I just mean a line of code. So 2 plus 2 is a really simple expression, but we can have more complex expressions. I can say 2 times 2 plus 4 divided by 8, all sorts of stuff. So that's what an expression is. It's just a simple line of code that expresses a function or an idea or something that we want to happen in our program. These are the arithmetic expressions that I mentioned. Arithmetic just means basic math. We can do some grouping, just like we can in math. Some of the stuff looks a lot like math, but is not really math because it's doing circuit stuff. But it looks like math to us. So for example, if I say 2 plus 2 times 5, you might remember from your math class the order of operations, multiplication before addition. So even though 2 plus 2 is the beginning, it actually does 2 times 5 first, and then it adds 2. But if we don't want that to happen, we can use grouping. So we use parentheses. Parentheses are like the little circle-looking guys on the 9 and the 0 keys. And we're going to use those a lot in coding, so I recommend getting used to it. So I hold Shift and make a parentheses. I say 2 plus 2, and then I multiply by 5. And that gives us a different answer because we do the addition first, and then we do the multiplication. So we can do grouping just like we would in math. I mentioned errors. If you do something that is, the program can't process, you're going to see an error. So if I forget an operator, if I say 2 plus 2 and I say 5 without a multiplication, I'm going to get a syntax error. So it's like, what does this mean? Why is there just a 5 here? This is not, this doesn't make sense. So you'll see errors like that. We'll talk about some more errors in a couple weeks. And we'll talk about this later. This is more math stuff. This is just a bunch of stuff you can do with JavaScript, but we don't really need to know this right now. We'll come back to this later. Integers and floats. So this is kind of an important thing to know for what we're going to do later, because we are going to use a lot of numbers to make our designs. That's one of the things that we're going to be doing in this class, is we're going to be making designs, and instead of like stretching out a circle in Illustrator or drawing with a brush in Photoshop, we're going to be using numbers to say, put a circle over here, make it this color, make it this wide and this tall. And so we are going to be using a lot of numbers. As we get better at programming, we're going to be using more expressions and fewer numbers. But we're going to be using a lot of numbers today, so it's important to know that we have two different types of numbers. We have an integer, which is a whole number. That's a number with no decimal point or no fraction. So 1 is a number, 2 is a number. We also have a thing called a float. A float, it has a decimal point, so 0.5 is a float. And JavaScript can kind of do both pretty well. It's actually not that good at floats as some other languages, but that's okay because we trade performance for simplicity. So we have numbers and floats. And in programming languages, we have these things called types. And you'll notice that when I say, what is the type of, so I can write type of, and then I can say like 5, and it'll tell me what it is. It's a number. But we really only have numbers. This is a little different if you've ever taken like a C class or a Java class, something like that. That'll be a little bit different. But, probably doesn't matter that much. We also have this thing called strings. We're going to talk about Booleans later. I'm going to skip that for now. We have this thing called strings, which are text. So we have numbers and then we have text. We're not going to use a lot of text quite yet. We'll probably use more text in a couple weeks. But just so we know how to write text in code, we have to use quotation marks. So we have to tell the program that the thing that we're writing is not code, it's just text. And it doesn't really care, it doesn't care about grammar or capitalization or other things like that. But we just need to use those quotation marks, because if I write a bunch of text like, hello, I am a string, that's an error, because it thinks that I'm writing code. But what I'm really writing is text that we want to see on a website or something like that. So I use quotation marks for that. I say, I am a string, and it's perfectly happy with that. And if I want to know what that is, I say type of, I am a string, and that's a string. A string is just a computer programming term for a series of characters. That can be text, it can be numbers, it can be, exclamation points and punctuation characters. It doesn't really matter. It can be anything. Okay. So the other thing that we really use JavaScript for a lot when we're doing web development, but not really what we're going to be doing in this class, which is more just kind of like graphics programming, is changing the website. So I'm just going to go over a couple of these things, but we're not going to do this a lot in class. So the console in JavaScript generally is an interface between our HTML and CSS and our user interactions. And so there's a lot of things that we need to know about the website to make those interactions happen. There's a couple things that are built into a browser that are very useful to that end. One is the navigator. The navigator tells us things like what type of computer we're on, what type of, User agent is like basically what type of computer we're on, like if it's a Mac or a PC, so we can learn things about that. It tells us about how much memory we have. It tells us all sorts of stuff. We also have this thing called the document, and that's actually just our whole HTML document. So you can actually see all of the HTML here. And this is how we can use JavaScript to change aspects of our HTML. Again, we're not going to do a lot of that in this class, but it's just it's one of the main things that JavaScript is used for, so it's worth kind of pointing that out. We also have the window. The window is a way that we can learn stuff about our page. So the window can tell us, like, down here, there's a whole lot of stuff. You can see the website actually can do a ton of stuff. But down here somewhere, maybe it's up here.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I do the same thing, like typing document to the console, but
You don't see it?
it doesn't give me all the details you have.
Click on this arrow.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good thing to point out. I went a little quickly there. So when I type in document and then I hit enter, it's collapsed inside this like section. So there's this tiny little triangle that you have to click on to see all that info. So yeah. So the window will tell us things like, I just saw it a second ago. There's too many things in here. Where we are, the height and width of our window, all this different stuff. Okay. So that is a very, very brief and basic overview of JavaScript. We're going to use JavaScript to make some drawings in the next part of class. I think we can probably take a break now, so maybe we'll take our break a little early and then get started, with our next section around 3:40. So let's do that. Let me know if you guys have any questions, and I can come take a look at your computer and make sure you've got stuff set up. And after that, we're going to get started using P5 and actually doing some drawing with our code.